On a cold September morning in 1941, in the United States capital of Washington, D.C., a small, modest house filled with the sound of a baby crying. Joan Trumpauer was born into a middle-class family. His parents, Mildred and J. Roy Trumpauer, were conservatives, firmly rooted in the traditions of the American South. The family moved to Arlington, Virginia, where Joan grew up surrounded by the realities of racial segregation. At that time, Southerners believed in the superiority of the white race, and this belief was deeply rooted in laws and culture. From an early age, Joan questioned the world around her. While other children accepted segregation as natural, Joan could not understand why people were treated differently because of the color of their skin. When her family traveled through the South, Joan saw whites only and blacks not welcome signs everywhere. She was confused and outraged by the injustice of it all. Joan loved hanging out with her mother, but she didn't understand why, in stores and restaurants, African Americans had to use separate entrances and couldn't sit at the same tables as whites. This bothered her deeply. Little Joan was beginning to realize that the world around her was not fair and that something needed to be done. During her teenage years, Joan spent a summer on a farm in Mississippi. There, she saw up close the misery and discrimination faced by African Americans. Black workers lived in deplorable conditions, receiving miserable wages for backbreaking work. Joan couldn't ignore what she was seeing. The images of poverty and injustice never left her head, and Joan knew she could not sit idly by. She decided she wanted to do something to help change this situation. In 1960, Joan entered Duke University in North Carolina. There, she found a group of students who, like her, were committed to the fight for civil rights. They participated in demonstrations, organized meetings, and discussed ways to combat segregation peacefully. Joan was determined to be part of this movement. She read voraciously about leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, who inspired her determination. Joan's first major act was participating in a protest at a segregated lunch counter in Durham. Sitting at a counter reserved for whites only was an act of great courage. Joan and her friends faced insults, physical attacks, and ended up being arrested, but she knew she was doing the right thing. "We can't continue living like this," Joan told her friends after being released from prison. "We have to do something to change this world." Determined to fight segregation, Joan left Duke University and transferred to Tougaloo State University in Mississippi. This college accepted students of all races and was in the heart of the segregated South. Joan knew it would be more difficult, but she was willing to face any challenge. In 1961, Joan joined the Freedom Riders, a group of activists who traveled across the South on interstate buses to challenge bus station segregation laws. Opposition was fierce. Buses were set on fire, protesters were beaten, and many were arrested. Joan knew the risks, but she was determined. On one of the trips, Joan and her colleagues were attacked by an angry mob in Alabama. Dinner was pure chaos, screams, shouts, blows. Joan was dragged by the crowd, but even in the midst of the violence, she maintained hope and determination. "We can't give up now," thought Joan, as she was taken away by the police. Joan was arrested and imprisoned in a maximum security prison in Mississippi, known for its brutal treatment of activists. The conditions were inhumane, but Joan and her cellmates supported each other, sharing stories and singing hymns of freedom. In 1963, Joan participated in the iconic March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Being among hundreds of thousands of people united by the same cause was a transformative experience for Joan. "This is how the future should be," thought Joan, moved by the power of union. The march not only galvanized the civil rights movement, but also solidified Joan's commitment to continuing the fight for equality. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was willing to face any challenge. During the march, Joan saw people of all races and ages marching together, chanting and holding signs demanding justice and equality. This gave him renewed hope that change was possible. She was moved to hear Martin Luther King Jr. speak about a future where people would be judged by their character and not the color of their skin. In the summer of 1964, known as Freedom Summer, Joan returned to Mississippi to help register African American voters. The goal was simple, but extremely dangerous in a state where the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups terrorized anyone who challenged segregation. Joan worked tirelessly, going from house to house, encouraging black citizens to register to vote. The atmosphere was one of constant fear. She and her colleagues knew they were being watched. One night in June, 3 of his colleagues, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, disappeared. Their bodies were found weeks later, brutally murdered. "This cannot continue," Joan said, determined. "We have to keep fighting, for them and for everyone who came before." These murders deeply shook Joan and the civil rights community. However, instead of giving up, they became even more determined to continue the fight. Joan knew the change would require sacrifices, but she was willing to give it her all. One of the most dramatic moments in Joan's life occurred when she attended a protest in Jackson, Mississippi. The group of protesters, including Joan, were attacked by a hostile mob. Joan was severely beaten and arrested. In prison, she faced inhumane conditions, but her determination remained unshakable. "They can hurt us, but they can't break us," Joan said to her cellmates. His courage did not go unnoticed. Joan became a symbolic figure in the movement, her image appearing in newspapers and magazines, inspiring many others to join the fight for civil rights. In one of these magazines, Joan was depicted with bruises and cuts, a visual testament to the cost of fighting for justice. But more than the wounds, the determination in their eyes sent a clear message. The fight would continue until equality was achieved. The efforts of Joan and other activists began to pay off. In 1964, the United States Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which prohibited racial discrimination in public places. The following year, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was signed into law, ensuring the right to vote for all citizens, regardless of skin color. Joan felt a mixture of relief and renewed determination. While these legal victories were significant, she knew that true change would require an ongoing fight against racism embedded in society. After the intense period of activism of the 1960s, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland continued her work for social justice, now as an educator. She taught history and civil rights, sharing her experiences with new generations and inspiring young people to continue the fight for equality. "The past cannot be forgotten," Joan said to her students. "We must learn from him to build a better future." Joan received invitations to speak at schools and universities, where she told her stories of courage and resistance. She believed that educating young people about civil rights history was crucial to ensuring that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. In addition to her work as a speaker, Joan dedicated herself to several civil rights veteran organizations, helping to raise funds and awareness of the needs of soldiers returning from combat. She also founded community programs to support military families by offering financial assistance, emotional support, and guidance. Joan believed that her true purpose was to serve others, and she dedicated her life to that mission. His story of heroism and sacrifice inspired many people to volunteer and support veterans and their families. Joan Trumpauer Mulholland lived to see many of the changes she fought for. She became a symbol of courage and resistance, inspiring generations of activists. His story is a testament to the power of the individual to bring about significant change in society. Joan continues to be a tireless advocate for civil rights and social justice. She dedicates her time to speaking at schools, universities, and community events, sharing her experiences and encouraging young people to stand up against injustice. "Never underestimate the power of individual action," says Joan. "Each of us has the power to make a difference." Joan's life has also been celebrated in several documentaries and books, which detail her contributions to the civil rights movement. She has been honored with awards such as the Martin Luther King Jr. Medal of Freedom and the National Medal of Freedom. These recognitions not only validated their work, but also helped keep the memory of their struggles and achievements alive. This story is based on real events. Although some dialogue and scenes may have been dramatized for narrative effect, the central events are true and have been documented in historical records and interviews. Joan Trumpauer. Mulholland's story is a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. His life is an example of how determination and courage can overcome even the greatest obstacles. Joan teaches us that the fight for justice and equality is an ongoing responsibility, and that each of us has the power to contribute to a more just and equal world. With her unwavering determination, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland proves that courage and the will to fight for what is right can change the world. His legacy continues to inspire generations, reminding us that, with faith and action, we can face the greatest adversity and transform society for the better.